gold, purple, fine gold. And if you remember what one of the great priests brought last week concerning the color purple, and that there's two organizations that are running this race, or running races, and they're both reaching their purple. Okay, they're both reaching the pinnacle of what they're going to receive. One is the Catholic Church and all of her daughters, which include everything that you see going on in the world today with the legalization of same-sex marriage and such. But the other one is the one that Yahweh is really focused on, and this is the House of Yahweh, running this race, the race which is of endurance, and the race which has to be run in accordance to the rules and regulations that Yahweh set forth. But here in chapter 9, and this was on the Feast of Trumpets, and, Pastor titled it, "The Catholic Church Uses Propaganda and Psychology to Bring Deception Concerning Sodomy." Okay, so the Catholic Church are actually in cahoots with what you see today. Otherwise, that judgment wouldn't have gone through, where the Supreme Court pretty much gave all of the same-sex marriages in America credence, okay, and gave them a foundation to stand on. Well, let's begin in verse 1. It says, "Shalom, everyone." Hey, you're looking great, great, great. Yeah, wonderful. All right, come on. And joyous cheers to Yahweh. And of course, gets the oxygen, the blood oxygenated and ready to listen to the message. It says, you may be seated. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We've got a microphone going up and down today for some reason back there. I don't know if it's here or it says, I don't know if it's here. If you get to where you can hear me, holler. Oh, sorry. If you get to where you can't hear me, holler. I wanted you to get every word of this, every word. You understand? Verse 3. That was a great sermon that the great Kahan De Benedetto Hawkins gave. He left out one thing, a little future thing. 909, date 0909. If you want to write this down, that's coming up Monday. That's when the Congress is called back in to make decisions on to make a decision on Syria. Did you get that? Congress is going to vote on this war Monday, 0909. And by everything I can see, whether they vote yes or no, that really doesn't make any difference with the scriptures. The scripture shows that these wars are coming, and the least little thing could set them off. And this is one of the things that we need to pay attention to, is the fact that the world is pretty much they're getting closer and closer to just total annihilation. Any little thing could set them off. But you can see how Yahweh is protecting his house through, guiding and directing what's occurring in the world, being fully aware of what's occurring in the world and making sure that nothing hinders this house from reaching the point that it needs to in order for Yahweh to let it go. If you remember, the priests have said many times that it could very well be us that are holding back these wars, and it's not that, well, great, we're saving lives then by our own sins and not overcoming, we're actually saving lives. No, that's not what it is. The quicker we could get to the end of this plan, this portion of Yahweh's plan, the better for all of creation. Okay, so we really do have to make this push, run this race that Pastor's been speaking of. Okay, but it says the least little thing could set it off right now. What if somebody shot a bomb from Syria or shot a rocket from Syria and hit one of the United States ships or one of the base stations over there where people are housed? And of course, we've seen some things this week where some military bases, once again, have been shot up by lone wolf, by individuals who, and of course, when you hear it on the radio, it's a deeply Muslim name, that they're using. But this is also part of that propaganda. Okay, this is also part of that propaganda that we see at the very beginning. That these people have a form of holiness. They do. The Muslims have a form of holiness, but they don't yet understand the authority from which it comes. Okay? That's what Pastor says. Yes, these people are considered, they have aspects of holiness, but they are not the house of Yahweh, learning true, complete holiness. Okay, so it says, this would start a war if they bombed some of the stations where the people are housed. This could start a war. And no holding back. And then it would spread. This is what everyone is saying. It's going to spread. That's what the scripture says too. We need some old, damaged furniture. Any kind will do. Beds, dressers, anything you got. This is for art, an art project for the feast, to display at the feast. And then after we get it used and burnt and everything like that, you could come and get it after the feast and take it home with you if you want. There's a few nice vehicles down there that are nice and scorched, and whoever wants them, just put in a bid. I'm talking about old, broken down stuff. So yeah. I saw the woman over here shaking her head. Yeah, come and get all of it. I got it stacked out in the backyard. Laughing, no. I wrote a couple of articles this week, and someone said they looked and they saw in a newspaper one of the articles. We are suspecting that these are hackers getting into the House of Yahweh computers and getting our articles and our newspaper and the newspapers. So, how or another? It says, somehow or another, they're connecting the newspapers, and newspapers are running them. Praise Yahweh. Now, the Peaceful Solution Character Education Incorporated speaks in the defense of Miley Cyrus, on Miley Cyrus's of the world, and offers invitations to them. Don't know if you're familiar with that incident, but she got a lot of criticism. I didn't like the criticism. It says, I'd like to criticize the criticizers myself, showing them where they're falling short. But that was actually leaked out to newspapers. And yesterday evening, I was called. Late yesterday evening, about 10. They said, I can't believe it, but there are about 17,000 newspapers got this thing and running it tonight. And I said, well, I just got it written and turned in. They just got it typed up, and unbelievable. But this morning, they called me and they said it's up to 46,968 newspapers. They're running that article. Praise Yahweh. I said last week, and I said last week and wrote an article on it this week. Yisrayl Hawkins says legalizing marijuana will only accomplish two things: more taxes for the government and more people that can't think. Praise Yahweh. Now, now this was placed, I'm told, on the medical journal, in one medical journal. It's a very popular one. I don't have the medical journal here in front of me. I guess I left it on my desk. But they had all kinds of other medical information, but put around our article, and ours was number one in their newspaper headline page. Praise Yahweh. Now that article on marijuana, what did I do with it on marijuana? They called me this morning and said that had leaked out too. And 50,090 newspapers are running it this weekend. Already. It's still coming up. I marked out some things here, and I wouldn't want you to see. This right here are a few of the. I better not say anything more. I just noticed something, but you'll see it. You'll see at feast. Really, some great news. Doors opening everywhere. This was one of the articles, and I marked out some of the unseeable stuff that I didn't want to look at myself. But this was the article on legalizing marijuana. And all the articles stacked around this, believe it or not, are health articles or articles concerning health and medicine. Here is another cover, and this is on marijuana. So you see, they're putting it out pretty plain, pretty bold. Here's one more, praise Yahweh. Biotech health. This is where I wrote it down. 50,000 biotech healthcare and medical, whatever it was. I left out the next word. I was in a hurry and got to get down here. I was running out of time when they called me. Updated report. Let's see. That gave several articles. Let's see. Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. We reoffered. Still, the newspapers are saying we're still holding a standing offer for the people to stop war and to get on the list, and a lot of people are doing so. We're quite up there now. But I don't remember what it is. At this same time that this is taking place now, death and disease are picking up everywhere, and especially here in America. But it's picking up all over the world. Birth defects cluster. You know what a cluster of grapes are? Well, of course, imagine one, and then you can imagine a cluster of grapes. Well, that's the way they're described. That's the way they described this. Birth defects cluster in Washington remains mysterious. They don't know what's causing it. They don't know what's causing this. They claim they don't know what's causing this. Health officials investigate a spike in cases of a fatal birth defect in central Washington state. Have found no common cause linking the cases, according to a new report from the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. The investigation began last year when a local hospital alerted the state health department
to an unusually high number of babies born with a rare birth defect called anencephaly, in which parts of the baby's brains and skulls are missing. Now, this is the way they're being born. And the increase now is really making them nervous because it's spiked. There are clusters of it now going on. Instead of a rare thing taking place, it's now coming in clusters. And they're worried about it. Maybe if they get worried enough, they can listen to our program or get our books, and we will tell them what is causing it. Babies born with anencephaly are missing parts of their brains and are usually blind, deaf, and unconscious. Well, of course, you can't expect a child to live under those circumstances, and all they can think about is going to war. Revealed. UK government let British companies export nerve gas chemicals to Syria. I think that was brought out in one of our news programs. But now these are some of the tricks. You can't really rely on any nation or the truth of any nation or organization because all is fair in love and war, as they say. And what the U.S. President Barack Obama is saying is different from what the Russian President Vladimir Putin is saying. And one is saying that Syria dispensed this nerve gas on its own people. The other is saying, and got proof of it, I guess they got into Britain's computers some way and got the receipts where they showed that Britain actually sent this nerve gas themselves to Syria and to the rebels, as they call them. Well, the rebels are drawing $1.56 billion payroll from the United States. They call them rebels. I don't quite understand that, but I'm sure the politicians do. Syria crisis. China joins Russia in opposing military strikes. Of course, they're training up now, and it's like they think the U.S. is crippled. The U.S. is not crippled by any means. They've put Barack Obama's put in a very critical situation to where if the strike is not made, then they'll laugh them out of the Mediterranean Sea. And like the king, as Yahweh prophesied, and I want you to remember this because I'm going to speak on this very thing. The king who killed Yochanan, he had to do it because he had to keep his word. And his word meant more to him than Yochanan's very life. Life meant nothing, so he went ahead and killed him. He did the thing. Russia, to keep helping Syria if it's attacked. So they're showing now that Russia and China and many other nations are going to get into this. Now remember, there's a three-way battle going on here. The Pope is shown, or the Catholic Church, which studies psychology. Most of their studies is psychology. In fact, one of our people who converted from Catholicism, who was in the Catholic schools for 4 years studying to be a priest, he said there was not one scripture read in the 4 years that he was there. And I said, well, "What in the world did you study?" And he said, "Psychology." Well, the one we have in office, or the two we have in office now, the scriptures shows are experts at this. Psychology is the study of the mind. Psychiatry is the study of the mind. Where, like they say things and do things that cause a person to think in a certain way, and then submit to joining people in doing stuff that are not right. But they make you think it's right. They actually make you think it's right, and they convince you that you can have salvation by doing these wicked things. But the person is thinking, for what they have said and the practices they have brought forth for them, that this is a right thing to do. I can remember many cases where they wanted people out of office, and they took them out, starting with propaganda. And during this time where they were arguing the point to get the people out of office, they brought up many things. They didn't say that, though. They would say one thing, but if you ask them, "Did you not say this?" "Oh yeah, but I meant this." That's part of that psychology, the mind tricks. So it could be taken in two or more ways. The Catholic Church is making some psychological attempts right now, and you need to be aware of these, and you need to really pay attention to this. What I'm going to show you here, these are attempts to put the Pope ahead in this three-way struggle. If you remember, Malachi Martin showed that this is a three-way struggle, and each of the three hopes to come out on top. The Pope hopes to come out on top, and of course, he's making moves to do so. If you notice, he's straddling the fence, so to speak. He says in one side of his mouth, we shouldn't go to war. And on the other side, he says, this man needs to be punished. We shouldn't go to war, but this man needs to be punished. On the other hand, he says to another nation, you better stay out of the war. War is not the thing you should do. That's what he says. That's what he's saying to Russia. And of course, Russia is the one that Malachi Martin said could be a grizzly overnight. He's a teddy bear right now, he said, but he could become a grizzly overnight. And Russia intends to come out on top. United States intends to come out on top. But the Pope intends to come out on top also. Malachi Martin said he wants a resurrected Rome Empire to where all nations are doing what he says to do. He dictates to them, and his dictation is made loud and clear. You're going to worship Mother Mary, the Queen of Heaven. That's what he says, or you're not going to be left alive. If you'll turn over to Jeremiah, please, Jeremiah chapter 44. I know you're all familiar with this, but you need to rehearse this. In fact, you really need to read the whole chapter about the 12 tribes. This is nothing new. The 12 tribes that came out of Egypt, they brought Christianity with them, which you see in Jeremiah 44. You see it in many, many places earlier than this also. But Jeremiah 44, you see this, the Queen of Heaven worship. And of course, it was condemned by the great prophet Jeremiah or Jeremiah, if you have a King James Version. It says Jeremiah, but his name was actually Jeremiah. He shows the destruction that they're having. He shows in Jeremiah 42 and verse 2, this is what Father Yahweh says. You have seen all the destruction. Now, the way of it says, now the way the King James is written, mistranslated, they make out like Yahweh is bringing the destruction upon you. Yahweh was not bringing it. They wanted kings and would fight their kings that would fight their battles for them. And the kings said, well, let's go over here and get this part of Israel. This tribe here, this colony, they're set up. They're rich. They got a lot of wealth there. Well, it says we'll take the wealth. We'll divide it among ourselves, and we'll take their best people with us and make soldiers out of them, and we'll build our armies. These things that Pastor is showing here is the way of the kings of the East, plain and simple. You know that Malachi Martin said that there's a three-way war between the United States, Russia, and the Vatican. Malachi Martin also did say that the Pope definitely intends on coming out on top. You know, but we really have to pay close attention to the things that we see going on in the world today. Because what Pastor wrote here, you can see it plainly being played out today. Okay, we saw with the Iranian nuclear arms deal. And what they're saying is that Iran is going to have the opportunity to get their hands on some money that has been frozen because of sanctions that was imposed by, spearheaded by the United States. But these things are coming to pass right now. And Yahweh wants us to be prepared and to be ready to listen and hearken unto the one whom Yahweh has sent, so that we could be part of his blessing. He who accepts a righteous man receives the reward of the righteous man. So just keep in your mind two other things. We can't rely on any nation or organization. Okay, we can't rely on any nation or organization because they believe that all's fair in love and war, in love and in war. And also the Catholic Church is making some psychological attempts to put the Pope ahead in this three-way struggle. And then, of course, the Catholic Church wants the whole world to reverence the Queen of Heaven. The Queen of Heaven wants to put herself above the congregation of Yahweh and above us. And that's what Pastor said a couple of weeks ago, that she wants to place herself above the stars, but not only the stars, but the entire house of Yahweh, not just the women, but also the men. She wants to take rulership. And if she could get rulership, then she can utterly decimate Yahweh's whole plan. But we know Yahweh will not allow that to occur. So praise Yahweh. It was a blessing to come before the saints of Yahweh. And if you'd all please stand, I'd like to turn the lectern over to the great Kahan, Kananya Hawkins.
Shalom, men. You may be seated. Now we're going to be continuing on here where the great Khan Nathaniel left off. We're going to actually pick up on page 88, though. We're in this sermon here. Let's see here. Chapter 9 of the 13th book of Yisrayl, part 2. The Catholic Church uses propaganda and psychology to bring deception concerning sodomy. And of course, the Catholic Church has used psychology for a long period of time. If we can remember all the way back in Genesis, when she said to Eve, Oh no, you will not surely die. Everything will be okay. He knows that in the day that you eat of it, in the day that you partake of it, you will be as the gods, knowing both righteousness and evil. Oh, a little leaven won't hurt you. You know, it's okay. It's all right. It's all right if you do this on the Sabbath. Just don't sweat, and it's not considered work. You know, she uses all these different methods of psychology. And remember what was spoken of in Daniel concerning this horn, this little horn, this beast that represents the beast. It would mentally attack. So it's using all forms of psychological warfare, so to speak. The United States military also does that. When they're going into a certain place, they'll use psychological warfare to try to get an upper hand over their enemy, to kind of drive them crazy and insane. You know, I don't know, they play Burt Bacharach all hours of the night or something like that, you know, to try to break their will. But the Catholic Church uses this propaganda, you know, these lies, to make people think something is what it really isn't. And you see this through all forms of media today. Of course, the media is owned by the Catholic Church, the majority of it, if not it being governed by it. If you don't play by their rules, and of course, you'll eventually get shut down. But it's to bring deception. Now, deception is the whole ball of wax, okay? If you keep the people deceived and you keep their eyes closed, then they remain in that state of darkness that was shown all the way at the very beginning here of Genesis chapter 1. You know, that covered the whole earth at that time. Not that there was no sun or there was no moon or anything like that. We see the same time period we have entered into now. You think about the laws of Yahweh, and you have to use Scripture to interpret Scripture. Don't lean on your own understanding, but get these things from that have already been presented to the house of Yahweh by the one sent and so forth. The laws of Yahweh is what brings light to mankind. The teaching, the upholding, the unfolding of your laws, you know, they bring light and they bring understanding to the mind. Well, when you deceive a person, when you block their mind to be able to receive that only source of light, in the absence of light, you have what? Yeah, darkness. Okay? You guys are awake, right? It's going to call on all three of you. Praise Yahweh. But in the absence of light, you have darkness. And so Satan's desire is to keep mankind blinded. Remember, we'll just go back there and read it right quick, in case there might be some. I know there are always new people, thousands of people tuning in continuously, and some new to the broadcast of the House of Yahweh and what's being presented. And some people in tuning in, you know, they've never, because of this psychology that's been used by the Catholic Church and Christianity in general, they're all under the same umbrella, they've never been taught to read their scriptures. I think many of us can think back to when those of us who came out of Egypt, came out of the world, can think back to the time period where we went to Sunday services, you know, your choice, 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. You can have your appointment with the Lord whenever you want it to. And I don't ever recall the scriptures being expounded upon. There were pretty stories that came out, you know, Daniel and the lion, and lion's den, and Samson and Delilah, you know, and they built on these stories and got the people's hearts all, you know, softened, and their hands moving toward their wallets and pocketbooks so they can give to the church. You know, they use psychology too. If they can tell a good story and get people laughing and smiling, they're more willing to donate to their cause. Ask them, what's the cause? Because I've got a mortgage. Because I've got a car payment. That's the cause that they have in the churches that you see with the preachers. And every now and then you'll see some of them getting busted because they've been dipping into the pot of the church, and they've been stealing out of the, you know, embezzlement, and they've been paying for their hookers and, you know, having late night parties and things like that. And their wickedness comes out and their folly is exposed. Well, Yahweh's been telling them this from the very beginning, but, you know, it takes a witness, an appointed person who Yahweh ordained to open a person's mind so they can see and understand these things. And it was Yahweh bringing us out of this deception, this psychology that we were in. Yahweh had a time preset for us before the foundations of the earth were ever laid, so that when we heard something got our attention. Maybe it was the Sabbath, or maybe it was the feast day, maybe it was the name of Yahweh, or don't eat pork or something. Something got our attention, and at that time, that alarm, as it is put, it went off. And we started to have a desire to learn why this bush burnt, but it never was consumed up, metaphorically speaking. But as we drew closer to Yahweh, our understanding grew, and the light of Yahweh's laws became clearer to us, and we were able to see the difference between what is right and what is wrong. Well, the Catholic Church, the beast, who is led by Satan the devil, doesn't want mankind to know the difference. Because remember what occurred throughout all of history when you had a group of people that came up and they had scriptures, or they had a manuscript, or the writings of the prophets and so forth, and they got to reading these things that taught the laws of Yahweh. They taught them about the feast and the Sabbath. They taught them about proper conduct. They taught them the peaceful solution. And then they started going and asking their preachers, hey, I was reading in this manuscript here, and it says that we're supposed to worship on the Sabbath day, and that's the seventh day of the week, and we're not supposed to eat the pig, and we need to keep the feast. Why aren't we doing that? You have spoken blasphemy! They don't want to hear anything like that. And that's about the time when people start with their witch hunts again. They bring up some more propaganda and say that this group of people are living with dogs, and they molest their children, or they work them. They teach them how to do something beneficial with their hands instead of sit down and play on a video game all day. That's horrible. You should allow your children to be able to sit and play on the video games all day long. If that's what they want to do, let them do that. And this is the words that come forth from a lot of the high-paid scholars, in today's schools of higher learning, and parents as well, who also went to these schools of higher learning. They don't see this, and we can't fault them or get angry with them because of it, because they right now are victims of this deception. And one day Yahweh's going to open their eyes, and how is He going to do it? He's going to do it through you, because we're learning what to teach, and we're going to take what we've learned and we're going to teach it to others. And they're going to come over to us to hear the word of Yahweh, to hear the light of Yahweh being presented to them, so that they can come out of this darkness, come out of the world, come out of her, my people, as Revelations 18 says. Well, let's look at verse 41 here. It says, well, that is what they're bringing. That is, he's talking about Christianity. They're wanting to bring Christianity to all the nations of the earth. And she's been working, and I say she, I mean Hillel, the Catholic Church and so forth, have been working very hard to see that this takes place. And when you see these wars against certain countries and cultures and nations and so forth, there's usually religion behind it. Wars are fought over religion. They're fought over rules that people cannot agree on. Now, if they were all to come into agreement with the laws of Yahweh, which brings no harm to anyone, which doesn't get the upper hand over their neighbor, which ensures peaceful and respectful interactions between a man and his neighbor, a man and his wife, a man and his children, and so forth. If they were to all be in agreement to uphold those laws, then we would begin to see the fruits of peace. And eventually we will, and that's a promise of Yahweh. But one thing we have to keep in mind is that it's extremely, vitally important that we take these lessons that are presented to us in the house of Yahweh, take them unto ourselves, and start to live by them. Start to practice them. Believe Yahweh in what He says, and the one that He sends to teach us these things, because, rest assured, brother, Yahweh is not slack concerning His promises. And if He says that I will give to mankind everything that my fingers have framed, that the last thing to be put in the lake of fire will be Sheol, will be death, if he says that everybody will have their own vine and fig tree and so forth, if he says these things, they're going to come to pass. Now, whether we are going to be there to see it or not, that's up to us and the choices that we make. Now remember, Yahweh doesn't desire that any should perish. He doesn't desire one person should perish. When Yada Iscariot did what he did, it wasn't Yahweh desiring that he would go ahead and get him on out of there so he can go ahead and stick another apostle in that place. Yada had a choice. Now, it was prophesied he would do certain things because of the man's character, but he was not forced to make the choice he made. He made the choice. Just like our high priest Yeshua Messiah was not forced to be without sin, he wasn't forced to choose not to retaliate. He could have said, you know what, Keith, you're right. I can call down a Legion of Malachim right now. Boom! He didn't make that choice. He made the choice to be like Yahweh, and it was evident that he loved Yahweh with all his heart, soul, and might because of his behavior. He never, ever desired to bring harm to anybody, not even his enemies that would seek to, come at him with the sword. He put the man's ear back on. Think about the attitudes and the character of the people today. We saw the fight, we see the news, we see what takes place in the Walmart stores, and then the women are trying to, rip each other apart, and the little boys trying to get in on it. We saw that not too long ago on the news. Another occurrence just took place not too long ago. Of course, these things take place every day. Every now and then something gets out and it, goes on the video and it becomes viral. But there were two men that were fighting in a grocery store, a place where people should be able to go and peacefully go buy groceries. Here they're all scrapping and brawling in the middle of the grocery store. By the deli counter, I think it was. Maybe it was over who's going to get the last pork chop. I don't know. But you see the confusion of the mind of the people because of the teachings that's led to iniquity, the rejecting of Yahweh's laws, the ignoring of Yahweh's laws. And so when you don't have the laws to guide, then what do? You have people making choices that are immoral. They eat unclean foods. They practice and engage in unlawful relationships. They put negative influences in their minds. And of course, these things bring about more hatred and confusion. And it brings about more war and vengeance and retaliation, which the scripture classifies as the way of Cain. And this is what we see Satan trying to bring to all the world under the guise of the label Christianity. So we have to be mindful about what we are in agreement with, what we choose to do, because we can fall right back into Christianity or God worship if we choose to practice certain things that are outside of the teachings, the laws, the statutes, the ordinances, the judgments of Yahweh, or anything that, as Deuteronomy says, all that they tell you to do, you must do. Don't go looking for thus saith Yahweh. If a priest gives you an instruction, if your counselor gives you an instruction, do it. Do it. Because they watch for your souls. It's the job of the priest of Yahweh, as it is the one sent who guides the priest of Yahweh, to protect, to guide, and to govern the house of Yahweh. And it will be that way forever. To see to the life, the joy, the peace, the abundant living of Yahweh's creation. And that's what we're all training for in the house of Yahweh, to maintain life, to keep it going. From food to the animals that are necessary, insects that are necessary too. I still don't know what the mosquito is for, but I obviously know they must work out at the Gold's Gym, because they've gotten really strong in the last couple weeks, boy. Them things are big. I had one flying by my head the other day. I thought it was a cat. But they are huge. But something that works really great is eucalyptus and lemon oil combination. I put some of that on the other day, and I was outside, of course, right around sundown. You put some of that on, and you'll hear them buzzing if you don't mind the irritation of the buzzing sound, but they won't mess with you. They won't land on you. They won't touch your skin. So that eucalyptus, there's some other oils that are very beneficial that Yahweh gave for his people, and they won't bring you a nasty side effect. You won't get skin cancer or melanoma from it or anything like that, but you will keep the bugs from bugging you. So just keep that in mind. Let's look down here. It says in 41 in the middle there, it says, let's go to the second paragraph. It says, and of course they had this huge army that they had put together in Babylon and in Rome, the 7 hills of Rome, that stood on the part of this religious leader, because he didn't have an army of his own. He probably felt he didn't need an army of his own, which everybody did the bidding of the Catholic Church, and they gave them their power. These nations gave their power to the Roman Catholic Church, and they did his bidding. They did the killing. 4 religious leaders that represented the 4 great horns of death that wanted to kill everything in sight. Everything that wouldn't worship Mary, they wanted to kill. Now you think about, why were they wanting to do this? Why were they wanting to kill? Why were they wanting to go out on behalf of a religious organization and kill people who had a different way of life? Who followed a set of rules that kept their bodies healthy, that kept their minds clean, that kept their animals undefiled, their crops were healthy, where they didn't bring forth disease to the person who ate them. Now, why would you want to go and destroy a nation, a culture, a city of people like that? You see, there's got to be confusion in the mind. And of course, the psychology, of course, we were all talking about this, their psychology, of course, incorporates within it the rejecting of Yahweh's laws, the iniquity. It incorporates sodomy. It incorporates the unclean foods and everything else that is shown in Leviticus chapter 18 and 11 and so forth, to where a person can't think on their own. They can't make a rational decision. So they just do whatever they're told, and they respond on emotion based on that instruction, because their minds are so confused and defiled that they only know one way to respond, and that's with wars and death and destruction. And we're going to have to deal with that as they make their way to the house of Yahweh. And Yahweh shows that we'll be able to turn it around, no problem. We don't have to be fearful of it. We ain't worried about it. The power that we have subdues all sin, which is the laws of Yahweh. And anybody who carries that two-edged sword, so to speak, you ain't going to be having one on the side of your, unless you got a sheath that you can keep your book of Yahweh in, and you want to whip that out. But it's the laws of Yahweh that's going to be in our hearts, our minds, and our hearts, right? And it's going to be brought forth through our actions, the words that we say. And with those words and the teaching and the experience and all the years that we've sat at the feet of the greatest teacher in the world, we'll be able to change the hearts and the minds of a person. And I remember that being said many, many years ago, that's an ability that we will be given. The ability to change the heart and the mind of a person to where it's not through force, it's not through coercion, or manipulation, but to create within that person a desire to want to choose righteousness. Now that's power. That's power. To motivate a person to not want to retaliate, and then them to choose on their own to not retaliate. That's true power. That's also what the Scripture classifies as true love. To do something, to teach someone something, it's also a friend that won't bring harm to them, to help them to value life as well, to where they won't even want to bring harm to themselves or others. And this is going to create a huge ripple effect throughout the universe that, Yahweh says that, I'll work a work that if it weren't told to you, you wouldn't believe it. I believe the things that we have yet to see that are coming, even with this multitude, the 2 billion people. Can you picture 2 billion people? I mean, can you literally picture 2 billion? I can't picture 2 billion people. I see these streets where the Pope comes and they have, 1.1 million or, 1.5 million people out there. And it's just little heads, all throughout the streets. And you just see, just from as far as the eye can see, just people. And that's not even close to 2 billion people. Not even close. That's what Yahweh says is going to come over to us, and we're going to be ready to teach them. Because we're taking in all the golden oil right now, every opportunity that we get, right? Right? So that we can be teachers of righteousness. Because despite what you might think, that's what Yahweh called you here, is to be a teacher. Remember Yeshua said, pray to the chief harvester. so that he may send out more laborers, more workers. Because the harvest is plenteous, but the labor is few. Now you compare that to the number in that harvest that's going to be coming out very soon. And look at what we have right now. Now Yahweh can do a great work with a small amount of people. He's proved it many, many times throughout the scriptures. But we need more workers, and we need more teachers to teach other people to be workers and teachers. And that's what we need to be taking full advantage of. When Pastor says this is a ground opportunity, a ground floor opportunity, you know, I don't think we sometimes quite grasp it, but it truly is a ground floor opportunity. There's never going to be another opportunity like this given throughout all eternity, you know, that's given to this house, this era right now. So really, you know, let's take it serious, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. So let's look over here to verse 46. Now, what they're talking about, they had troubles because Jeremiah in chapter 44 and verse 9, Jeremiah, he was talking about asking them, have you not forgotten, or have you forgotten the wickedness of the kings of Yada and the things that your wives did? And, you know, the prophets of Yahweh had to kindly, you know, rebuke the people and chasten them. Yeketskeh did the same thing, and they were baking their cakes to the queen of heaven. The women were weeping for Tammuz and so forth. Pastor was saying here in verse 46, he says they're talking about they had troubles all around them, but they were killing them off, because they says when we were in Egypt, you know, we didn't have to worry about these things. We had our pots were full of meat. We had vegetables and onions and leeks and garlic. You know, they were whining about that when they came out after Moshe brought them out. And they were still whining about the same thing when Jeremiah was talking to them. And so it wasn't that they didn't have opposition from the enemies around them, but they were fighting back and they were killing them. And they were killing off the opposition, the same as we see right now. If a country rises up and creates a power, what do? We go in and we squash them. We eliminate the people, we eliminate the problem. Of course, it doesn't ever really eliminate the problem, because more people come up with the same ideology. That's never worked. War has never worked. And so it's like a dog chasing his tail, and of course that's what Yahweh classifies a sodomite, as a dog. And so they were killing everyone that tried to resist them in any way, and all of this was going on in the land of Israel at that time. And the people started leaving, of course, and going to other places, and they would go hunting them. And the apostle Shaul was one of them, hunting the people that were trying to hold on to a little bit of righteousness, that were trying to hold on to maybe the Sabbath day or the feast day, or protecting their women and children and so forth. They will go hunting them, seeking to take their lives, and saying, be like us. If you come in agreement and be like us, then we'll let you live. Just take a bite. Remember the persecutions that took place with the people during the Dark Ages and the witch hunts. They always tried to get the people to eat some pork. If you just eat a little bit of this pork, remember they had patrols that went around. And if they didn't smell pork coming from your house, then they would bust into your house and see if you were or were not cooking it. Maybe you had leftovers, I don't know. And if you weren't, then they would bring you before their judges. And so, of course, that pork, creates the confusion in the mind, and it does other things to the body. But they want you to be like them in their wickedness. Misery obviously definitely loves company. Look at verse 49, or 48, excuse me. And notice the cakes they made to her in verse 19. I'm just going to show you something here. I don't know. We have it in our books, but some of our young people may not have seen these. This is a today's version of these. Everybody can see that pretty well, huh? I don't have to zoom in. But those are those hot cross buns. Of course, they make them a little bit, and they make them for festive occasions and so forth. But these were part of the things that were being made, and they were making these things to these gods and goddesses and worshiping them in many other ways besides for making a piece of pastry. But remember, they were weeping for Tammuz, and this tea is what they put on these buns, and they put on many other things symbolizing the gods that they worshipped, as well as the war that they encouraged them to bring forth as well for anybody who resisted them in their worship. Let's look up to the top of page 89. He says, "Now there were shown in Leviticus 18, they're shown in Leviticus 18, that is, these abominations. He says, which you committed, that your land has become a desolation." Showing it wasn't that Yahweh wasn't the one bringing this desolation. He wasn't the one bringing the sickness. The Great Khan talked about some of the diseases that were on the rise in the infants, the newborns, the children born with birth defects. In fact, one of the things I was looking at, this was just one particular instance of Down syndrome, that since 1970s, the instances of Down syndrome is up 30%. Up 30%. And this is just one particular form of birth defect. There's many more. Of course, they don't classify everything as a birth defect. But all we're seeing is a continual spike in these curses that mankind has brought upon themselves and upon their bodies because of the breaking of Yahweh's laws. Yahweh's not doing these things. It's mankind that's doing it, but they're doing it because they're following this church, this organization, this serpent, this beast that is bringing forth deception through psychology to make everybody like Sodom and Gomorrah. Now in verse 57 it says, this is our hope, it says, "There is no protection against these bombs. What you're seeing building here is going to wipe you out unless you turn to Yahweh for protection. He has a protected place, and He will protect you unless He gets you here. And He will protect you until He gets you here if you turn to Him in righteousness. And righteousness is not killing." Yes, Yahweh will protect those who are following the house of Yahweh until He can get you here. He's not, if you're following the house of Yahweh, you're not able to get here right now, don't be discouraged by it. Yahweh, He knows all those who belong to Him. And not one hair of your head will even be harmed. He'll bring you to His protected place, so don't worry about that. Make plans, though, and doing what you need to do to get you and your family to safety, though, and to protect yourselves while you are out there. In verse 58, "He who lives by the sword," the scripture says, "he who lives by the sword is going to die by the sword." Let's look over to page 91 there. And so we see a lot of these things being pushed, the homosexuality, the bestiality, all these things, worshiping, trying to get people to stop this teaching against this LGBT movement and so forth. And of course, just recently, this was 2 years ago. So, in the last 2 years, we've had the push and the move to make these things legal. Remember, just because the world makes it legal doesn't make it legal according to Yahweh's laws. Yahweh's law supersedes mankind's laws, all right? And we always have the instruction that as long as it doesn't break Yahweh's laws, then fine, we can do it. If it says keep the speed limit, drive 70 miles an hour, that's not breaking Yahweh's laws, we can do that. But if it says you can go ahead and commit sodomy or smoke marijuana or whatever, what does Yahweh's law say? Don't do it. There's our answer, right? Pretty plain and simple. Well, of course, Yahweh says to prevent this in Deuteronomy 6, teach your children. Teach your children when you rise up, when you go to bed, when you walk by the way. Teach the laws of Yahweh to your children, and teach them what it does when you break this law. And of course, the children of Israel, they got off of this. They got off of the strictness and obedience of teaching the laws of Yahweh to their children because they didn't see the value in it anymore. They got gaiety and fun, the television. What's coming on tonight? Let's go out to this bar or this club. Let's leave the children with a babysitter and they can watch television and play video games. So the children were still being taught. Their characters were still being developed, but they weren't being developed and taught in the direction that Yahweh had told them to do in Deuteronomy chapter 6. So as a result of that continually taking place and that cycle continuing to go over and over, we now have a society in a time period where sin has reached its peak. But despite that, Yahweh is bringing out a people unto Himself that will choose righteousness, choose to be like Him, and reject the inspiration and the influence that comes from the gods and choose righteousness. And that's going to be to our honor. And as we go throughout all eternity, the Malachim and the beings in heaven, they're going to be rejoicing to know, to meet somebody that they know throughout all this mess, throughout all this darkness, through all the war and all the ease of entertainment and sin, that we had the backbone to stand up against it and say, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that. As for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. And they're going to be honored to meet you. In fact, you might have lines of people standing up to, have you get your signature, your autograph, or something. But they're going to be extremely anxious to have you come to their planet or their galaxy or their universe to start to fix the mess that has been caused because of the same type of psychology and deception that's taking place in the heavens that we see taking place here on the earth. So we'll stop right there. May Yahweh bless your understanding.